The first time my neighbor collapsed in his wheelchair and cracked his skull on the concrete, our HOA president pulled out her phone and started recording. Not to help. Not to call for an ambulance. She crouched over him, smirking, and said loud enough for all of us to hear. See? He's faking. His legs moved. But his legs hadn't moved. His body had just convulsed from the pain. That was the moment I realized our neighborhood wasn't safe anymore. I live in Maplewood Grove, a quiet suburb just outside Denver, Colorado. I'm 34, a copy editor who works from home, and the kind of neighbor who bakes banana bread when someone new moves in. I thought this was going to be the perfect place to settle down. Then David Turner came home. David's 31, a veteran who spent 3 months in Afghanistan before an IED left him paralyzed from the waist down. He used to jog every morning. He used to play catch with the kids on the block. Now he was coming home in a wheelchair, with hospital wristbands still clinging to his arm, and all he wanted was to get through his front door. His wife, Elena, was trembling when the contractor pulled up to install a temporary wooden ramp. Their kids, 9 and 6, were standing by the porch, holding a "Welcome Home" Daddy sign they'd made with red and blue marker. That's when Margaret Cole appeared. HOA president. 62 years old. Permanently pressed khakis. Clipboard like it was glued to her hand. Absolutely not, she barked, striding across the lawn. This violates Section 3(2) of our architectural guidelines. All exterior modifications require 30 days' notice and board approval. I thought maybe she was just being her usual difficult self. But when Elena's voice cracked, "Margaret, he literally can't get inside the house." His paralyzed, Margaret finally looked at David. Looked at the wheelchair. And said, "Well, that's what apartments are for. Maybe this neighborhood isn't suitable for your needs anymore." I swear my jaw actually dropped. The contractor tried to reason with her. It's just temporary. We'll match the color. He needs this for mobility." Margaret cut him off. "Are you licensed and bonded through our approved vendor list?" When he admitted no, she smiled. "Then you're trespassing. I'm calling the police." David wheeled forward, his hands trembling. "Please. I just got home. I haven't seen my kids in weeks." And Margaret, she bent down to his level. "Funny," she sneered, "you were walking just fine at the Memorial Day barbecue. Now suddenly you need special accommodations." I wanted to scream. She was accusing him of faking. Elena pulled medical records out of her purse, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold the papers. "I have proof. His doctors signed everything." Margaret waved her away like she was shooing a fly. "Anyone can forge documents. I've seen people pretend to be disabled for sympathy. You're not fooling me." Then David tried to do it himself. "I'll make it," he said under his breath, and started dragging his wheelchair toward the steps. But wheelchairs aren't made for stairs. By the second step his grip slipped. The whole chair tipped backward, and before I could reach him, he hit the pavement with a sound I'll never forget, metal against concrete, flesh smacking hard. Elena screamed. The kids cried. Blood pooled under the back of David's head. And Margaret? She just kept filming. "See? Everyone look." He moved his legs. "I told you he was lying." Our neighbor Richard, a retired firefighter, sprinted out and pulled his phone. "I'm calling 911. Stay with me, David." But Margaret stormed up to him and shouted so loud the dispatcher could hear. "This is a false alarm. I'm Margaret Cole, HOA president of Maplewood Grove. This man is an actor. He's faking his injuries for attention." Richard blinked at her like she'd grown horns. "Are you insane?" he barked. He turned back to his phone. "No, please send an ambulance to 1047, Willow Lane. Paralyzed veteran, major fall, head trauma." Margaret lunged for his phone. "I have legal authority here. Cancel that call." Cancel it or I'll have you arrested." By then half the neighborhood had gathered. Some tried to help David, others just stood frozen, horrified. I'll never forget the look on little Tommy's face. He's 10, used to play catch with David every weekend. He tugged Margaret's sleeve, his voice small but firm. "Why won't you let Mr. David go home? He's hurt. He protected our country." Margaret pointed her clipboard at him like it was a weapon. "Because rules exist for a reason, young man." And then, with a roll of her eyes, she muttered one word that made the whole crowd go silent. "Allegedly. Allegedly." As if his service, his sacrifice, his injuries, weren't real. That was when the shift happened. Richard kept the 911 call going. Nora, a nurse from 2 houses down, knelt beside David and shouted, "His blood pressure is spiking, this is life-threatening." Margaret turned on her, sneering about expired car registrations, but it didn't matter. Because Nora pulled out her phone and started live streaming. "This is Margaret Cole, HOA president of Maplewood Grove, preventing a paralyzed veteran from entering his own home." Margaret's face went pale. "You can't film me without my permission. That's illegal." But within minutes, the video had 100 shares. Then 200. And none of us knew it yet, but that was only the beginning. Because Margaret wasn't just cruel. She wasn't just drunk on power. She was hiding something bigger. Much, much bigger. And what came next would rip our entire neighborhood apart. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I checked my phone, the video had climbed another 1,000 views. By dawn, it had hit 127,000. Comments poured in from veterans groups across the country, furious, offering lawyers, donations, anything. But I couldn't shake the image of Margaret's smile while David lay bleeding on the concrete. At 2 in the morning, my doorbell camera sent an alert. Someone was creeping past my house in a hoodie, stopping to take photos of my driveway and mailbox. The way they moved, slow, deliberate, made my skin crawl. 3 days later, Elena texted me in a panic. David's surgery had gone okay, but their insurance company was refusing to cover the specialized wheelchair he needed. They claimed the fall was preventable. And attached to the denial letter was something that made my stomach turn. An incident report filed by Margaret herself, claiming David had been reckless and caused his own injuries. Her signature was right there at the bottom. That night, I drove straight to Nora's house. She had papers spread all over her kitchen table, not just the insurance denial, but letters. Letters Margaret had been sending to doctors' offices for months. 3 different letters about David alone, calling him a drug seeker, accusing him of faking his paralysis for pain meds. 12 more about other neighbors. She'd written that the Hernandez family were illegal immigrants, that old Mr. Chen was a registered sex offender, that the Millers were selling drugs from their garage. All lies. Nora slid the stack toward me. "She's been poisoning people's reputations for years," she whispered. Later that weekend, Richard's son Ethan, who was home from college, showed us what he'd found online. Margaret had a secret account on Nextdoor under the name Concerned Resident 2015. Over 200 posts. Each one targeting specific families in Maplewood Grove. Each one dripping with venom. She accused. She slandered. She made people afraid of their own neighbors. Ethan had screenshots of everything. And that was when Rachel Ford entered the picture. Rachel was a disability rights lawyer downtown. She'd seen the viral video and reached out, offering help for free. We met her at a coffee shop, sliding our evidence across the table. She flipped through it, her expression hardening with every page. "Viral videos get attention," she said, "but to nail her legally, we need a pattern of discrimination. A case. A paper trail." We had it. But we needed more. Turns out, more was already coming. 3 neighbors from Willow Court knocked on my door the next morning. Each one had doorbell camera footage of Margaret measuring their grass with a ruler at 5 in the morning. Each one had violation notices, always right after they put up a political yard sign. One woman showed me 8 separate violations in a single month. All because her grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. We added everything to the folder. The pile of evidence grew until it filled a binder. Then 2. But Margaret wasn't going down quietly. 2 days later, Richard called me in a panic. Margaret's husband, Frank, had shown up at his door with 2 sheriff's deputies, claiming Richard was harassing his wife. Richard showed the deputies the folder of evidence. They looked uncomfortable, told him he should probably get a lawyer. That same week, Elena called me sobbing. Their GoFundMe, which had already raised $45,000 for David's therapy, had been frozen. Margaret had filed a complaint with the platform claiming it was fraud. Elena's voice cracked. That money was supposed to buy his wheelchair, his therapy, everything. I promised we'd figure it out. But inside, I was terrified. Because Margaret wasn't just vindictive. She was calculating. And she had power. Then came the midnight phone call that changed everything. It was Janet, one of the HOA board members. She was whispering, like someone might overhear. "I've been going through the financial records," she said. "Karen's been stealing $30,000 from the reserve fund. Payments to a landscaping company that doesn't exist." Her voice shook. "The company's in Frank's brother's name. I have copies. But I can't keep them here. I don't feel safe." I threw on a sweatshirt and drove to meet her at the 24-hour FedEx on Main Street. Both of us kept checking our mirrors the whole way. While the copies printed, Janet leaned close and told me more. Margaret has dirt on everyone. Affairs. Money problems. Immigration issues. That's how she stayed in power this long. People are scared to cross her. We split the evidence into 3 sets, one for me, one for Janet, and one for Rachel. As the printer whirred, I kept glancing at the door, half expecting Margaret to walk in, clipboard in hand. The next morning, Rachel filed an ADA complaint with the Department of Justice. That afternoon, code enforcement trucks rolled down our street, citing neighbors for basketball hoops, garden sheds, even the wrong shade of black on a mailbox. Every single complaint traced back to Margaret. That night, I walked past David and Elena's house. The kids' welcome sign was still taped to the door. Their dad was still in the hospital. Their lives were falling apart. And Margaret? She was still out there. Watching. Waiting. Plotting her next move. I thought we'd already hit bottom. But I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. When I was a kid, my dad used to tell me there were 2 kinds of people in the world, those who follow the rules, and those who make them up as they go. He always said it like a compliment. Like the rule makers were heroes. But I learned the truth the hard way. I was 14 the first time I realized rules could be used as weapons. My high school's assistant principal, a woman named Mrs. Howard, wrote me up for wearing a t-shirt that was distracting. It was just plain blue, no words, no logos. But she decided it violated the dress code. When I tried to argue, she smirked and said, "If you don't like the rules, maybe this school isn't the right fit for you." Back then, I thought she was just a petty bureaucrat. Now, staring at Margaret with her clipboard and her endless citations, I realized some people spend their whole lives sharpening rules into knives. A week after Janet gave me the HOA financial records, things started spiraling out of control. First came the citations. Richard's basketball hoop, 6 inches too close to the sidewalk. Nora's garden shed, allegedly too close to the property line, even though it had been there 15 years. My mailbox, the wrong shade of black. When the county inspector showed up, he apologized. "These complaints came from the supervisor's office," he said quietly. "We don't have a choice but to follow up." The signature at the bottom of the paperwork? Frank's. Meanwhile, the video Nora had streamed hit 500,000 views. A local reporter, Sandra Lee, interviewed David from his hospital bed. His voice was quiet but steady as he explained what Margaret had done. Within hours, Margaret's lawyer fired off a cease-and-desist letter to the station, claiming defamation. The station aired the segment anyway. That night, at the rescheduled HOA meeting, Margaret's hand shook as she read from a prepared statement about outside agitators destroying our community values. Her voice got higher and higher, almost screeching, until people started recording again. She announced she was suing 43 residents for defamation. Nobody took her seriously. Not anymore. But that was before she made things personal. 3 days later, my editor at the Tribune called me into his office. He looked sick. Her lawyer threatened to sue the paper if you keep writing about Maplewood, he said. Our insurance company's worried. I have to put you on administrative leave. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. My job wasn't just a paycheck, it was my lifeline. My identity. And now, thanks to Margaret, it was slipping away. The same week, Richard's homeowner's insurance was cancelled after Margaret filed complaints about his grandson's skateboard ramp being a safety hazard. Nora got a letter from the state nursing board after someone filed a complaint accusing her of practicing medicine without authorization. Screenshots from her live stream were attached as evidence. And Elena? I'll never forget the day I saw her sitting in her car outside the CVS, frozen, crying. She'd tried to buy David's nerve pain medication, but every credit card was declined. Margaret had filed so many false reports that the insurance company had flagged their account. When Elena finally called her mother for money, she was shaking with humiliation. We were all unraveling. Rachel, the lawyer, kept digging into the HOA finances. She discovered the landscaping company Frank's brother supposedly owned didn't exist. It had been created 2 months after Margaret became president. No employees. No equipment. But over $200,000 in payments. It was fraud. But proving it would take time. And Margaret knew how to weaponize time better than anyone. Then came the night that broke me. I woke up to Elena's screams from across the street. I stumbled outside barefoot, and what I saw made my stomach flip. Their orange tabby cat lay dead on the porch, its neck broken. A note was taped to its collar. Fake heroes don't deserve real pets. Their kids came running out before Elena could stop them. The older one threw up in the grass. The younger just froze, shaking. David wheeled himself outside, pale, silent. He didn't cry. He just stared at the cat like all the fight had drained out of him. The police showed up, took photos, shrugged. Without witnesses or cameras, there's not much we can do. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, shaking. I thought about Mrs. Howard, the assistant principal who used the dress code to crush me when I was 14. I thought about Margaret, smiling down at David's broken body while she filmed. And I realized, some people aren't just cruel. They're predators. And predators don't stop until someone makes them. The next morning, I started digging into Margaret's past. And what I found made my blood run cold. The first thing I learned was that Margaret had a history. She wasn't new to this. An old LinkedIn profile showed she'd worked at 2 other HOAs before Maplewood Grove. When I started calling around, pretending to be checking references for a potential hire, I hit pay dirt. A woman in Scottsdale told me Margaret had been forced off their board after 18 months for harassment and financial irregularities. Another man in Tucson said the same thing: lawsuits, sealed settlements, missing funds. Both mentioned whispers about her targeting specific residents until they moved away. It was the same pattern we were living through, over and over again. Margaret wasn't a mistake. She was a storm that moved from neighborhood to neighborhood, leaving wreckage in her wake. The following week, things went nuclear. Nora got arrested at her hospital job. The police showed up with forged bank statements and emails proving she'd embezzled HOA funds. It looked professional, like someone had spent serious money making it believable. She spent 18 hours in custody before her lawyer proved she didn't even have access to those accounts. But the damage was done. The local news plastered her name across the screen, nurse arrested in HOA scandal. When she got home, she couldn't even go inside without crying. That was when Rachel, our lawyer, called an emergency meeting at a diner 20 minutes outside town. Too far for Margaret's eyes and ears. She spread a yellow legal pad across the table, covered in notes and arrows. "She's not just a bully," Rachel said, tapping her pen. "She's running this like organized crime. Kickbacks, shell companies, blackmail. I'm filing a RICO suit." I didn't even know what that meant, but the fire in her voice gave me chills. 2 days later, we got the proof. A woman named Patricia Hale reached out after seeing Nora's live stream. She said she'd been Margaret's victim in Tucson 5 years ago and still had boxes of evidence, but an NDA had silenced her. She didn't care anymore. She shipped us 3 USB drives overnight. I'll never forget the sound of Margaret's voice on those recordings. Laughing. Boasting about forging documents. About planting evidence. About destroying the worthless people who didn't belong in nice neighborhoods. I played them for Rachel, and she nearly dropped her coffee. By that afternoon, she had filed the lawsuit, naming both Margaret and Frank, the fake landscaping company, and 3 board members she believed were taking kickbacks. And then everything exploded. David, still pale and recovering in his wheelchair, recorded a TikTok holding up his Purple Heart and his medical records. Calm, steady, he explained every lie Margaret had told. By nightfall, the video had over 1 million views. Veterans from all over Colorado showed up in pickup trucks, flags flying, parking outside David's house like an honor guard. The next day, 30 veterans in wheelchairs rolled down Maplewood sidewalks in what they called Operation Rolling Thunder. They positioned themselves legally on public property, directly blocking Margaret's driveway. When she stormed out, screaming that terrorists were attacking her, the dispatcher on the 911 call actually sighed. Everyone in town knew her address by now. The veterans just sat there in silence while she screeched. And this time, dozens of neighbors filmed every second. That night, Rachel and I sat in my kitchen, listening to Margaret's voice on those recordings again. "You can't let people like that into good neighborhoods," she cackled. "Once you let one in, the whole block rots. You have to cut them out." Rachel shut the laptop. "This is enough to bury her," she whispered. But she was wrong. Because Margaret wasn't done yet. A week later, black SUVs rolled down our street at 6 in the morning. The FBI. But they weren't here for Margaret. They arrested Frank in his driveway, boxes of resident files in his trunk, files he'd been selling to identity thieves for years. Names. Social security numbers. Credit reports. Notes Margaret had kept on who to target next. And still, Margaret stood on the lawn, screaming that Frank had acted alone. That she knew nothing. That she was the real victim. 2 days later, our HOA insurance company dropped coverage entirely. A letter arrived saying Margaret would be personally responsible for all legal fees in the RICO case. I saw a second mortgage company van at their house that same afternoon, taking photos. For the first time, Margaret looked cornered. But cornered animals are the most dangerous. A week later, Elena's screams tore through the night again. Their brand new wooden ramp, the one a contractor had rebuilt, was in flames. The fire department arrived just in time to keep the house from catching. And there was Margaret. Standing in the street. Live streaming. Dancing while the ramp burned behind her. Protecting property values, she shouted to the camera. "Parasites and welfare queens don't belong here." When the cops arrived, she kept filming. "The veterans are using mind control to frame me," she screamed as they cuffed her. Thousands of people were still watching her live stream when they read her rights. The whole neighborhood stood frozen in silence, lit by the flashing red lights. It felt like the end of something. But deep down, I knew it was just another beginning. By the time Margaret shuffled into court in her orange jumpsuit, hair gone grey, she looked 20 years older than the woman who once strutted through our neighborhood with a clipboard like a crown. But if she thought she'd find sympathy, she was wrong. The prosecutor started with Patricia's recordings. Margaret's own voice bragging about planting evidence, destroying lives, and using rules to cut out the trash. Then came the neighbors. 47 of us testified about the fines, the threats, the harassment. Each story landed like another nail in her coffin. Margaret insisted on representing herself after firing 3 different attorneys. She cross-examined everyone with bizarre questions, accusing Richard of being a Soviet spy because he drove a red truck, claiming Nora was part of a medical conspiracy because she was a nurse. The jury sat stone-faced. And then came the biggest blow. Margaret's daughter, Alison, took the stand. Tears streaming, she pulled out a notebook she'd found in her mother's desk. On the cover, written in Margaret's sharp handwriting, termination list. The first name was mine. The second was David's. Inside were detailed plans to make David's death look like complications from his paralysis. Notes about cutting his medication, blocking ambulances, staging accidents. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the judge's face hardened. Margaret leapt up, screaming, "Lies! All of it! Communist propaganda," until the bailiff had to restrain her. The jury didn't even need a day. 3 hours later, the foreman read the verdict. Guilty. On all 37 federal charges, racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy, civil rights violations. Margaret collapsed in her chair, thrashing as deputies dragged her away. 6 weeks later, at sentencing, she ranted for 2 straight hours about being a patriot, about parasites destroying America, about how she was the next Paul Revere. The judge let her finish. Then gave her 18 years in federal prison. The gavel cracked. The courtroom erupted. And just like that, the woman who ruled Maplewood Grove with fear was gone. 2 months later, we held our first HOA meeting without her. Richard was voted in as president. His first act? Shredding Margaret's 200-page rulebook and replacing it with 10 simple, fair pages. When it was time for public comments, David wheeled himself to the microphone. He paused, looking at all of us. Then he said 5 words that made the entire room cry. "I just wanted to come home." The whole room stood and clapped until our hands hurt. The civil lawsuits wrapped up a few months later. Between HOA insurance, a judgment against Frank, and separate civil settlements, David and Elena received $1.8 million, enough to cover medical care for life, plus house modifications and a college fund for their kids. The following weekend, every neighbor showed up at their house with tools, paint, or food. Together, we built a permanent concrete ramp with railings. No one asked about permits. No one measured grass. We just built it. When it was done, the kids covered the ramp in sidewalk chalk. In big colorful letters, they wrote, "Mr. David is our hero." For the first time in months, I saw him smile. A year later, things were different. Our neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was united. We'd stood up to a predator, and we'd won. Sometimes, when I walk past David's house in the evenings, I see him in the driveway teaching his son how to throw a football from his wheelchair. Elena sits on the porch with Nora, sipping wine, both of them laughing. The ramp we built is now lined with flowers. And every time I see it, I remember the night Margaret burned the first one to ashes. But now, the new ramp stands stronger than ever. A symbol of what happens when a community refuses to bow to fear. Margaret thought she was untouchable. She thought she could break us, one by one. But in the end, all she did was teach us how to fight back, together. And that's exactly what destroyed her. She thought the rules made her powerful. But the truth is, the moment we stopped being afraid of her rules, she had nothing left.